Welcome to another episode of Strange Encounters Down Under, where we explore mysterious hauntings, thunderous happenings, inexplicable phenomena, and puzzling mysteries that leave us baffled and wondering, what the? But before we go any further, let me remind you that if you enjoy this episode, please remember to like it. And if you think your friends would enjoy it too, then if you feel so inclined, please remember to share it. And if you think, hey, these people talk about topics that I'm interested in and I'd like to hear more, then subscribe to the channel and remember to tap the bell to receive notifications of future episodes. So in this episode, Ben and I are talking about Australasian cryptids, animals that cryptozoologists believe may exist somewhere in the world, but not believed to exist by mainstream science. And Ben and I aren't claiming to be experts in this subject, are we, Ben?
No, not making that claim, but having a red hot go.
Yeah. But we're just talking about this topic because we want to learn more about cryptids too. So actually, Ben, I wanted to start off by asking you, when did you become interested in the subject of cryptids, or what got you interested?
Well, what sort of got me interested in the first instance was basically Yowie reports. That was one reason how I got interested in it. And the other thing that made me interested in it too was I thought, with all the Aboriginal mythology that's out there in Australia, with mythological creatures that exist across the different Aboriginal cultures, I thought there must be a point at which myth and actuality diverge. And that also got me very interested in this topic as well of cryptid creatures, because the Aboriginals have been here for a very long time, thousands of years. And I thought that surely in that time, if there were cryptid-style creatures, they would certainly have bumped into them. And how they may have interpreted them is interesting as well. So that got me interested on one level. That was the first part that got me interested. And then I just happened to a chance to come upon local Yowie reports from East Gippsland here. And that sort of really ignited it for me. And I went on to a big Yowie. When I wasn't doing UFOs, I got right into Yowies, and I made sure that I visited every actual location of Yowie sightings across eastern Victoria, and I've done that. Been to the actual spots. If standing on the actual road or in the actual gully where the sightings had been made. So that sort of got me really excited about it as well. And at night time, daytime, all sorts of time out there, never saw a bloody thing. But anyway, it didn't stop me from going out there and oohing and ahhing over being in the locations where some really, really top quality sightings had been seen. Mm. And then I sort of thought, well, beyond just Yowies, or not just Yowies, they're pretty spectacular. But I also thought to myself, well, what about the Bunyip? You know, the legendary, the massive, great Australasian legend of the Bunyip, which has been around for a very Australian thing, the Bunyip. You know, as a child, we heard Bunyips and sung Bunyip songs and all sorts of stuff at school. So they've been very ubiquitous in Australian culture. So I was very keen on that fact about Bunyips as well. But they're a little harder to track in terms of the modern era. Most of the reports for Bunyips seem to have come from the past, which is interesting. And so I started looking at that, and I've got no reports from around here. And then I started looking at some of the Aboriginal legends, and then there's other creatures out there too that have been reported as well. So there's been a groundswell that sort of came out of my UFO interest, and sort of as a side project, it all twisted up into this let's call it cryptocurrency, where I got myself really into crypto, an active and pursuant interest in it, which continues to this day.
Very interesting. Actually, that's very similar to my own story. And because I just got really interested in the stories of the Australian Aboriginal people, and I wanted to know more. And I've always been very interested in other cultures, and so this was just an extension of coming to understand more of their stories and their understandings, and yeah, just the one thing to another. And I started reading about real accounts, and just got really, really fascinated by the whole subject of other beings. Beings, yeah,
Well,
which is myriad of them.
There's a myriad of them, and I think that and do I believe in them? Yes, I do. Why do I believe in them? Because I think that there's certainly enough credible reports for Yowies that there's something definitely attached with that. I don't think anyone can argue, if you've realistically examined the actual evidence with an open mind, that that there's something out there in the Australian bush that's 8 to 10 foot tall, wandering around in whatever capacity it is. I think that that's an actual reality. And because the Aboriginals were such a, in many cases, particularly around here, more of a nomadic style. Down south, though, are a little bit more nomadic, moving around. Up in the north, they tended to stay up around all the barramundi areas and that sort of stuff, the caves and all that sort of stuff. So it certainly, I thought for the time of period the Aboriginals have been here, they would be completely familiar with everything that was living here in Australia. Whereas us armchair Westerners who sit in our homes don't get out there and haven't known the wilderness on the level of the Indigenous population. So that to me sort of said, well, you've got to pay attention to what the Aboriginals have reported and how they've reported it. So how, in what terms, what's their terminology? How have they interpreted these things? And I think that's important too. And I actually don't think there's been enough work done in this area. I really don't. I just think there's so much more potential to be explored out there. And I'm not saying that I'm necessarily the man to do it. I'm keen on the sidelines, but someone probably really should take that as a torch and really run with it, I think, and maybe might find something interesting.
Yeah. Well, there are people doing things in the background, but we just don't hear many of them. But we should get on talking actually about the Australasian cryptids. Would you like to start?
Yeah, I'll start off. I've got one here that I think is rather fascinating, and it's a Queensland one. So, which a lot of these things are based in Queensland, but this is specifically a Queensland cryptid, and it's kind of interesting because it's unique and it's not unique at the same time. And it's basically a sea monster, and sea monsters have been reported throughout history. So, whether they're misinterpreting seals or whatever, you can argue that or not, but there's certainly a lot of sea monsters that have been reported. And this one was really, really very famous. And it occurred quite a few years ago in 1964. So that's winding back the clock, well into over 50 years ago.
Yep.
So this is the Hook Island monster. And the Hook Island is an actual island up in the Whitsundays. So, and I got onto Google Maps and sure enough, there it is. There's this island out in the Whitsunday Passage. And this is what was photographed in December 1964. It's a very famous picture. Like, it's been used around the world in a lot. I've seen it in monster books and things all through the 70s and 80s. This picture was appearing in monster books quite regularly, and I was very familiar with the picture, but I wasn't familiar with the backstory. In fact, I actually thought it was in America. That was, Florida or somewhere like that. But no, it's in Queensland at Hook Island, and it's been a controversial picture as well, in that it was sort of, a lot of people said it was a fake, and this is 1964. So you've got to remember that you didn't have the ability that we have. If this picture came out today, you can say, yes, well, okay, that's a much higher possibility. But in 1964, this would have been a lot harder to produce as a fake. And so this is another image that was sort of drawn representational of the Hook Island monster. So that's the type of creature, just to give you a bit of an idea. So it kind of looks like a giant tadpole, I suppose.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it looks like a giant tadpole. So what is the actual backstory to this whole thing? How did this image come into fruition? So there was a man called Robert Le Serac was his name, and he was wrecked on the Great Barrier Reef with his family and a friend, an Australian friend. I think he was actually French, and the Australian friend's name was Henk de Jong. And they had bought a motorboat and had decided to spend 3 months on Hook Island, very Robinson Crusoe type of a thing. Hook Island being one of the Whitsunday Islands. They were all crossing Stonehaven Bay on December the 12th, 1964, when Le Serac's wife spotted a strange object on the lagoon floor. And it proved to be this gigantic tadpole-like creature, estimated at 30 feet long. That's 3 yowies. So
yowies.
That's estimated at 30 feet long. And they took several still photographs of it, gradually moving closer towards it. Now, eventually, La Serac and De Jong plucked up the courage to approach the object, to approach it underwater in order to film it. And it proved larger than they first thought. And with its estimated length now increasing to 75 to 80 feet. So
more yowies.
8 yowies. It didn't move, and they suspected it might be dead. And just as Le Serac began filming, it opened its mouth and made movements towards them. And they returned to the boat, and by the time they got there, the creature had moved off. So that's the basic story of what the Hook Island monster was. And there was a large pale region that was interpreted as a wound visible on the right side of the tail. And it was suggested that this was caused by perhaps a ship's propeller or something like that, had caused the animal to take rest and refuge in the shallow bay of Shoalhaven Bay on Hook Island. So the eyes were located on the top of the head and well away from the front of the snout, where pale and possessed slit-shaped pupils of little eyes, and mostly black in colour. The animal had brown transverse stripes and its skin was smooth in texture. It possessed no fins nor spines of any kind, and they didn't see any teeth inside the mouth. So, and Serac was a professional photographer. That's what he did for a job. And, you know, the image, it just went right around the world, and it's never been proved to be false. It's never been proved to be false. And it's, you know, given the presence that we've got, you know, like Kraken out there in the water, which is the giant squids and that type of stuff, there's no reason to really think why there couldn't be some giant tadpole-ish type creature that was out there.
Yeah.
So, and then someone suggested that as the, you know, like going down the fake angle of it, that it was brown or black plastic bags, all filled with sand and basically strategically placed in position out there to replicate this thing. But seriously, I mean, to me, it doesn't look like that. I'm open to everything, you know, like no problems. I'm happy for it to be proven a fake, but the image itself is a really interesting looking image. And I sort of tend to think that, you know, that the story, you know, it's the image, you look at it closely and people can look at it offline from this forum and just look at it yourself. And I reckon it doesn't look like it's a faked image, particularly from 1964.
Actually, it's fascinating because I've spent quite a bit of time going through the Trove website where they archive articles, newspaper articles, magazine articles, etc., going back to, you know, late 1800s, and there is a wealth of these types of stories in there. And I've come across Bunyip stories and Yowie reports, and of course they weren't called Yowies at that time, but you know, these big hairy men were basically, they were called, and ghost sightings and hauntings and old UFO reports. Like they're all in there. You just have to spend the time to go through and have a look. And it's amazing how far back they actually go.
It's actually a treasure trove.
It is. I guess that's why they call it Trove. Who knows? And if you're looking, it's isn't it trove.gov.au? I think it is trove.gov.au. You can just go there and you can spend hours looking through all the different newspaper articles.
And National Archives are good too. If you like digging around trying to find things, and the National Archives we've got squillions of documents in there and all types of topics that are out there. So yeah, if you've got the time and the inclination, it's a great way to spend a rainy Sunday afternoon.
Yeah. So going from the water monster to the air monster, I guess you could call it. I don't know if it's a monster, and heading north to New Guinea, I'd like to talk about the Ropen. And it's shortly after World War II, stories of a flying creature called the Ropen, or demon flyer, began to be reported from Papua New Guinea. And it's described as a large bird-like creature with a wingspan of about 25 feet. I mean, that's big, with leathery wings like a bat, a dark grey coloration, long serpentine neck, beak, and distinctive head crest. And it has a long tail with a flange on the end, a beak filled with teeth, and razor-sharp claws. I mean, could you imagine that? I mean, my mind just goes, what?
Love to imagine that.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't have an image to show of it, but in the book by James Sweeney called A Pictorial History of Sea Monsters, published in 1972, he discusses a sea chart dated 1595, warning mariners to beware of a variety of sea monsters. And he depicts two flying creatures with long necks and head crests and ribbed wings and tails split on the end like a flipper, flying over the islands of New Guinea, which is that's fascinating. 1595, some stories from that time.
Yeah.
So the Ropen is said to have a taste for decaying human flesh and has even harassed native funeral gatherings with Western missionaries present, like OMG.
Yeah.
Like, stand back, people.
Yeah, we've got to deal with this thing flying in. Wow.
Yeah. But the Ropen is also described by the indigenous people of New Guinea as having a bioluminescent glow. And this glow was also observed by biologist Evelyn Cheeseman in her 1935 book, The Two Roads of Papua, where she states it was a most intriguing mystery because by no possibility could there be human beings out there using flash lamps at intervals. And in any case, they were too far to be caused by any ordinary electric torch. Now, my grandfather was stationed in New Guinea during World War II, but he never mentioned seeing any strange flying creatures to me. But that doesn't mean that no other soldiers saw them. And I was thinking that maybe, being located in a jungle which was foreign to Australian soldiers, they could have seen something strange, but just put it down to the odd exotic wildlife of Papua New Guinea.
It'd be like the Lost World.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'd love to go there. I would love to go there. But even today, it's still a relatively dangerous place to travel to. So, it's extremely beautiful, but it does have its risks as a travel destination.
Yeah.
But it's
so do you have any airborne strange creatures, or are they on the land?
All of mine on this particular occasion are water dwelling sort of creatures at the moment. Yes, I haven't got any airborne ones, but I would like to talk about that a little bit further. And sort of the talk of Thunderbirds, which is another common terminology for these large winged creatures that are seen at different points in time flying around the world. A couple of things to talk about on that. It does throw up the same conundrum as what the Yowies do. As in, like, if I took my camera to New Guinea today and I went over there for a month and I sat out in the jungle with my malaria bug juice on, with my camera at the ready, filming away, would I capture anything that would show that this is a real creature? The answer is probably no. I could spend a month over there looking in the deepest, darkest corners of New Guinea and find nothing. But having said that, you could be there, and not under those circumstances, you could be there as a resident or something, and then one of these things just happens to appear. and it appears for this period of time and then it disappears, presumably flies off. So you sort of think, well, where and how is it living? Okay, so there's that. Where and how is it living? New Guinea is more accessed now, 80 years after World War II. There's a lot more roads and stuff crisscrossing it now. Long trips everywhere because it's very windy to get there, very mountainous place. So where are they located, and how are they, resisting filming? The other thing I'm interested in too is the reports with the missionaries that had seen it. I would like to see the missionaries' reports.
Yeah.
So, and again, it's all time accessing this stuff, having time to chase it down and everything like that. But
being able to find it.
Or being able to just find it in the first place. Like, do you walk up to the Anglican church and knock on their door and say, look, I'm interested in Thunderbird reports from Papua New Guinea that missionaries have made in the preceding 80 years. What do you got?
Yeah.
So, so that's an interesting thing. Do I believe that they are actually possible? Yes, I do believe that they are possible. Do I believe that they are out there? I would like to believe that they are, as much as I believe that the Yowie is out there. So I think that's a really interesting thing. And I think if they were going to be anywhere, New Guinea would be the place.
Yes, true. Yeah.
Like, it would be the place, or Sumatra or somewhere like that, because, in these mountainous areas that are difficult to access, even with our modern cameras and everything like that, still a very elusive thing to catch. And they're also probably, like a relatively rare sighting too. Like, I'm not sure what the frequency of sightings or reports for those large flying creatures, which I'm extremely interested in, how often they are actually reported in terms of a statistical point of view.
From the little that I've read, I think that they're probably few and far between.
Yeah, so it's a rare bird, so to speak. It's a rare sighting, but it doesn't mean that they're not out there. I suppose the other thing is that, like all these cryptids, is there some dimensional aspect to this? Are they coming from other dimensions into our dimension and disappearing again? Like, you've got to be open to that as a possibility, because they're hard to find. Yowies are hard to actually find, and there's 1,000 videos of something, thumping on a tree or shaky cameras in the bush and all that sort of stuff, but they ultimately don't show anything. It's all very interesting, but we haven't got really good, clear footage of these creatures. But
quite elusive.
Quite elusive, extremely elusive. I'm still prepared to believe that they actually exist and that they are out there.
That's because you're a weirdo. Like me.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. I'm dedicated to that cause, and have weathered quite a bit of heat over the years, I suppose, for having interest in all things strange. Yeah. But I think, but what I want to say a quick thing about that is I think it's really interesting to be interested in such things.
Yes.
Because it's pushing the boundaries of our reality. We're exploring the fraying edges of our reality of what actually is out there, and not just accepting the world as at face value, which unfortunately I think a lot of people actually do.
Yeah.
So, and that's okay.
I think it's just about being open-minded in life in general, isn't it?
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, I've just been open-minded in life. If someone comes to me and says, "Oh, I saw a Thunderbird, a Yowie, and a UFO," I'd be saying, okay, let's talk about that. Let's explore it, and let's see if when it all boils down, that's what we come to at the end of it.
Yeah,
and go through that process. And all of these reports, things we're talking about, they have been investigated by people in the past, and and I still think there's enough compelling morsels there to keep us interested.
Yeah. Well, next I'd like to talk about, as you mentioned before, bunyips.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm really fascinated by bunyips. I really only became interested in bunyips as opposed to, say, yowies about 4 years ago when I was doing a radio show, and I just came across the story while I was digging around in Trove and the Trove website. And I read some of the stories, and the descriptions were really quite bizarre, really. But there was, like bunyips are sometimes described as Aboriginal water spirit beings. And I think a lot of European Australians might think they're a bit of a mythical legend. But in 1850, a report appeared in the Moreton Bay Courier, which is an area just east of Brisbane here, of an aquatic monster seen on the property of a Mr. T.L.M. Pryor at the Logan River in Queensland, which is just south of Brisbane. And a female member of Mr. Pryor's family was walking near a large lagoon at the station property when she observed on the surface of the water a living animal of extraordinary shape and dimensions. And the head appeared to be elongated and flattened like the bill of a platypus. The body, from the place where it joined the head to about 5 feet backward, seemed like that of a gigantic eel, being about the ordinary thickness of a man's body. But it was much larger, as it had a coiled body, and beyond those coils was what seemed to be the tail of a fish and having the semi-transparent appearance of a bladder. That's an interesting description. So basically this big head with a face like a platypus with a long body and all coiled around, but mostly underwater. But the head, which was small and narrow in proportion to the size of the body, was furnished with what seemed to be 2 horns, which were quite white. And under the circumstances, it was difficult for the woman to judge accurately the whole length of the animal. But by comparison with other objects, it was supposed that the parts visible above the water must have been 30 feet. So that's quite a lot. And the woman who saw this strange sight was alarmed, naturally, made her way to the house, returned to the spot accompanied by another lady and a servant woman. And by this time, the greater portion of the monster had disappeared beneath the surface of the water. And the tail alone was visible, but that sunk soon afterwards. And from subsequent inquiries made by this Mr. Pryor, it appeared the lagoon had long enjoyed the reputation of being the home of this monster, being seen more than once by men on the station. I mean, wouldn't you say, if I'm moving on to a station and there's something weird in the lagoon, I would be telling the owner, hey, do you know about this? I mean, they kept their mouths shut. I don't know why. But anyway, while he moved in. But anyway, they were certain that the local Aboriginal people wouldn't bathe in the lagoon and were extremely frightened of what they believed lived there. Now, this lagoon was nearly a mile in circumference and of great depth. And the owner of the property said that in some parts of the lagoon went to a depth of 90 feet without finding bottom. So there's ample space for more than one of the huge creatures to live in the lagoon. I mean, I guess they would multiply. I don't really know. But there was another story that I found, and I love these old stories. That's why I'm telling you about it.
Yeah. I love them too. Yeah.
Yeah. In 1845, the Geelong Advertiser newspaper reported that a knee joint fragment of a large animal had been found. And when the bone was shown to an Aboriginal man, he said it belonged to a bunyip, which he had seen himself. And he drew a sketch of the animal. And when the bone and the sketch were shown to other Aboriginal people, they confirmed it as a bunyip. And one of them said that they knew where an entire skeleton of a bunyip could be found. And this got me thinking, because when I read that first bit, I thought, oh, gosh, how the heck did he know that this bone, was a knee joint fragment of a large animal? Or how did he know it belonged to a bunyip? And I'm thinking, God, he must have sort of fought one off or killed it and skinned it and then ate it or something like that, But I guess they would have left skeletons around. I never thought about that.
Yes, and I think that if you saw that image, that's the one. That was the picture that he drew. That was the actual picture that Aboriginal guy had drawn for the newspaper.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll bring one up in a minute and show you. But one of the other people said that sorry, I'm stuck on the wrong story. Another person said his mother had been killed by a bunyip at the Barwong Lakes near Geelong. And another woman was killed near where the punt crossed the Barwon River at South Geelong. And another man showed deep wounds on his chest made by a bunyip's claw. So I think that's really interesting because these people would have witnessed those things.
Mm.
And they explained that the reason why very few white Australians had seen them was because these are amphibious animals and they very rarely come onto the land, but they do from time to time to bask in the sun. But when they hear the slightest noise, they silently roll back into the water with barely a ripple. So I guess if you're living on the land and you regularly visit lagoons, I guess you're more inclined to see these types of creatures in the water environment rather than, other people, basically. But I'll just see if I can bring up this image that I have.
Yep.
There we go. There we go. That's one that I've came across.
Wow, that's almost like a walrus, isn't it?
There's various descriptions. This one doesn't seem to have the long neck. But I guess, there could be, this is just one description, put it that way, that someone has sketched from someone's testimony, I'm expecting. Yeah. So I guess we've got the artist's eye on that one. Yeah. So they're really a strange sort of creature, but they have existed in Aboriginal stories for a very long time, and they even used to keep the kids in line. So don't you go out there, the bunyip's going to get you.
Exactly. Don't go down by the water because the bunyip's going to get you. Don't wander away from the campfire because the yowie's going to get you.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, lots of possibilities out there.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, on the news tonight, a huge seal has been found on a farm 30 kilometres inland in Victoria. Down near Warrnambool in Western Victoria. So these farmers went out to their property, and all the cows were gathered in one corner, and then here's this big, giant, adult, presumably male seal in the paddock with the cows, and the cows were like had never seen the seal before, and it's really sort of strange. So somehow this seal, this fully grown seal, is 30 kilometres inland on a farm. So that's a really interesting thing. And I believe firmly that yes, that bunyips exist and described in many, many different ways. And I think one of the early explanations was that they were seals, that when white European settlers went in there, that things like seals and that would end up creeks and up on farmlands. It's just happened today.
Wow.
Here in Victoria, and you can probably Google it on thing, stray seal on farm. It'll pop up on the.
Is there an image?
Yeah. There's video of this seal in the paddock with the cows. It looks hilarious. Because
there's a story of bunyips being reported near Bow Desert, which is southwest of Brisbane, not too far, probably within an hour's drive anyway. And the bunyips that were seen there were in a waterway, and there was talk about like these waterways being connected underground.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if it's possible with that seal that it came in from the ocean through came up and down through various underground waterways. That would be curious.
Well, that's right, exactly. And they said that there's creeks and tributaries and all that sort of stuff flowing around out there. So yes, it's quite conceivable that a seal could make its way up a river, and then into a creek, and then up to a stream, and next minute he's 30 kilometres inland, which is an extraordinary distance in my opinion.
Yes, absolutely.
Extraordinary distance for a seal to be away from the beach, like that's one hell of a lost seal
It's true.
to be that far out. And I encourage people to look at it because the footage is amazing.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, you'd have a look. These cows are like, eyeballing seal, and it's a big seal. It's a big seal. So it's come up the waterways presumably, and that's how it got there. Unless you believe a UFO dropped it off, but
anything's possible.
Anything's possible. It's probably more likely that he actually did hitchhike up there. So it's sort of interesting. And these were the sort of things that they say they were misidentifications and sort of stuff. But I don't think so. But I just wanted to perhaps share a couple of images. Yeah, so this is kind of like again, it's going with that kind of walrusy sort of a look. It's sort of semi-similar to the other image, and I've got a couple of others too that are worth looking at. So there you go, another sort of relatively toothy style creature. So there's been loads of different one more just to get to go in a group of three. So another creature rising out of the thing, but people are certainly more than free to go and look at all the images that abound out there for Bunyips. So but yeah, people would hear them at night, making noises and and presumably stealing stock or whatever, or even people, has been said. A couple of interesting things that like most of these reports are coming from a long time ago, as in 1850s, 1880s, certainly all in the 19th century, and lesser extent as we get through time. Doesn't mean it's not a valid phenomena. It just means that it's an elusive phenomena. And but one interesting thing is that there are thousands of campers out there now with their caravans and camper trailers and all that sort of stuff. So it'd be interesting to see if any reports start to appear with these type of cryptos appearing more regularly, because that leisure culture is so big in Australia. And I know people do see things when they're out there, but it just doesn't necessarily filter through to being reported either. So people could be camping by a remote creek somewhere, hear something strange, tell a few friends, and that's as far as the story goes. So it's harder for these stories to gain traction in the media.
So what's your next your next monster or cryptid?
I'm going to take us somewhere really strange, really, really, really strange. I would like to talk about now the Yaramayhawho, which is a rather obscure and probably relatively little known Aboriginal creature that they would talk about. So that is a Yaramayhawho. So very weird looking little guy. The Yaramayhawho is a vampire of Australian Aboriginal mythology. It's a red and frog-like in appearance, with a large head, big toothless mouth, and suckers on its hands and feet. It lives in fig trees, where they wait for passers-by to lay down for a nap. And once they're unconscious, the Yaramayhawho drops on them and drinks their blood. When all the blood has been extracted from the victim, the Yaramayhawho washes the corpse down with a little water and has a nap itself. When it wakes, it barfs up the victim's skin.
Ew.
And a little while later, that skin bag becomes a Yaramayhawho too.
Oh.
So this is a really strange, I've never heard anything like it. It is really very, very strange. So basically it lurks in the treetops until a person would walk under it, and it would leap from the tree onto the person, drain all the blood, and then swallow them whole. So, wake up, take a nap, and then it has this regurgitation and creates another one. So it's been described as a little red frog-like man or woman. So it can have obviously both sexes, about 4 foot tall, with red hair and skin. It has an enlarged mouth with no teeth, suckers on the fingertips, and basically a really weird little guy that lives in the trees. So I sort of thought to myself, I've not heard of an actual reported encounter with one, right?
Mm.
But it's such an unusual creature, and there's a lot of detail around its description and its activities. So therefore, you've got to say, okay, so is it completely a creature of mythology? Has it been just created by Aboriginals as a part of the rich tapestry of their culture? Or is there some basis in truth for these creatures? Did they exist at one point in time? And again, like all the cryptids, are they relatively rare? And are they in locations where generally people don't go to?
Mm.
So that's the other interesting thing about it. But I just sort of had thought to myself that it's such an interesting little guy that here's another. I'm just going to dare to share another one.
Dare to share.
Dare to share, hopefully without destroying everything. So let's share this one, which is interesting. So this is a group of them sitting in the trees, these little red guys that look quite frog-like, with the sort of some images depict them with hair. So that's interesting. And so, yeah, that's just another image of them.
Mm.
So I'd never heard of these creatures before.
No.
I'd never, ever heard of them. And it was only like a few weeks ago that I'd started going, okay, let's dig out and see what we can find. And I happened to stumble across it. And I thought, I bet there's not many people out there that actually know about this little guy, this little creature with this really strange habit. It's basically a vampire with vampiristic intentions on victims. So is it a part of the culture where they say, okay, kids, don't go wandering away from the fire because the Yaramayhawho will get you, as well as the Yowie, as well as the Bunyips, and as well as the Thunderbird? Like, is it a whole arsenal of things just to scare children and keep them at bay? Or is there some basis or for fact at some point in time for a rare creature that existed in the Australian landscape? Big question mark.
Fascinating. Actually, I think there's so many, living things in Australasia that are yet to be discovered and or have been discovered by amateurs, but have to be confirmed by scientists. Not that we care whether scientists care or not, but for them to become officially existing, that's what has to happen. Yeah, interesting, isn't it? But so I'm going to skip now over to New Zealand. Yep. And I've sort of gone off I'm on the periphery of cryptozoology, because this is not about, well, they are creatures, but they're human looking. And this is about the small people of New Zealand, known to the Maori, and I hope I get this right, as the Patupairahi. Yeah. So in Maori tradition, the Patupairahi were the first people of New Zealand. And they're supposedly supernatural beings who are rarely seen, who live in the deep forests and mountains. And they're described as having light skin, red or fair hair. And unlike the Maori, they're never tattooed. Now, there's some debate regarding their size. Some say small, others say are the same size as humans. But then there are traditions where they are giants. So sunlight is said to be a curse to the Patupairahi, and they only venture out in the night or when the mist is heavy enough to shield them from the sun. Now, that's the mythology, okay, in the Maori tradition. But there are those who believe the Patupairahi are something more than just myth, and that they're descendants of Celtic tribes who discovered New Zealand some 3,000 years before the first Polynesians. Now, I came across some accounts of people seeing these little people. And in the 1940s, there's a report of two men who were walking, who came across a clearing, and one man sort of fell backwards into this bush. And as he was getting up, they both saw little children wearing woven flax garments run across the hillside and disappear into the forest. And as they did, because they're thinking, what are the children doing out here? What's going on? But as they ran into the wooded area, the last one, who was slightly taller than the others, he turned around and looked back at the men. He had long hair and a beard. And they realized that he was actually a small person, very small, actually. So that was in the 1940s. Then in 2007, there was a mixed age group of Maori forestry workers at Waimanlaku area felling pine trees. And 7 of them were in the van driving back home to be with their families after being away for a week with work. It was 8 p.m. in the evening, and some of them were dozing in the back seat and 3 were sitting in the front of the van. And suddenly the driver slammed on the brakes, screeching to a halt on the road. And there in the headlights, according to the 2 witnesses, was a row of children walking across the road in front of them, coming down a bank on the left side to across the road in the headlights and up the bank on the other side, and they disappeared between 2 trees. So the men just sat there while 20 little figures walked across the road in front of them in the headlights.
In 2007.
2007, yeah. Now, the man who was telling that story and also went on his own little expedition was a guy called Gary Cook, who's a New Zealand author and amateur archaeologist, and he writes about missing a mysterious past of New Zealand. So he went to the same campsite where these he went to the same site where these had been seen in 2007, camped out with a friend for 8 hours, had all the infrared, cameras and all the other stuff, all the gizmos we like to have on these sort of little outings.
Yeah.
Didn't capture anything on camera, but did hear a sound like 2 sticks clicking together, like just click, click, and then a gap, and then click, click, and a gap. And then they'd hear the sound in a different direction, then they'd hear the sound in another direction over here, another direction, etc. And they later learned that was how these little people communicated. And I guess that makes sense, across spaces. So at a later time, Gary Cook travelled with an anthropologist to a cave in the Hokianga Harbour where they found skeletal remains of more than 60 little people who were between 3.5 to 4 feet tall.
Wow.
So that's really interesting in itself. So he took that anthropologist with him so he could see these in situ. And of course, they can't do anything because he's not anthropologists and archaeologists don't want to touch this stuff.
No, you wouldn't.
No, thank you. So I imagine, I didn't hear, he didn't say it, but I imagine he might have picked up a couple of the bones. I don't really know, or just left them alone. Probably left them alone, knowing the type of person that he is. So being very respectful of these situations, So, I mean, little people in New Zealand, bunyips in around Queensland and various places in Australia.
Yes.
Strange creatures flying in the air above New Guinea. Water creatures, water monsters all over the place. I mean,
Stranded seals.
Yes, the seals. I mean, it's just Australia's a very strange place. I understand why international tourists go, Australia? I don't know.
Well, we've got such a really interesting and unique fauna as it is, like in the world, with pretty much the only place with marsupials anyway. It's a very interesting and unique country that's been here for a very, very long time, and it has its secrets.
Yes,
it really does have its secrets, and I would love to be able to ask Australia, just tell me the answers to these secrets, so so we can know. But then I suppose we wouldn't have the fun of trying to figure these stories out. But that's a very interesting encounter from New Zealand. I find that fascinating.
But there are countries. When I was looking at bunyips, and I knew you were going to do the Hawkesbury River monster, and et cetera, et cetera. And I was reading various articles about these and reports of what people had seen, and they're seen in Africa, through Indonesia, up in various Southeast Asian countries. We've got, we know there's Yowie type beings, Bigfoot over in United States, Canada. I mean, the Yeti in Russia. Is it Russia? Russia, I think they reported from.
Yes.
I mean, there's strange creatures all over the place. It's just that we seem to be living with this cherry-picked reality, shall I say, that's been cherry-picked by scientists of, yes, what is in our world and what isn't.
That's very true. I think that's 100% right. If it doesn't agree to the line or toe the line, then there's a lot to sort of to knock about it, or it's easy to dismiss, and anyone who sees these things is obviously crazy. So that to me is is the real shame with these things, that science should be a little bit more open to it. People generally don't have anything to gain by making up wild stories, and it's always easy to tell someone who actually is, telling you a wild story over someone who's had a genuine, puzzling, strange, or disturbing experience. So, you only have to do investigation for a short period of time to easily see the difference between those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And if you've got a baseline record of things being reported, then there has to be something. You've got to give it some sort of credence, that something is actually going on.
Yeah, at least investigate it properly and for a period of time before you say, no, that's not real.
Yeah, exactly. So, and just leading off, perhaps getting towards the end of the episode, there's another famous Australian monster which is called the Hawkesbury River monster. So the Hawkesbury River is in New South Wales, and it's just north. I think it's northwest of Sydney is where it actually is. And there's been reports of a 12-meter giant, elongated neck, Loch Ness monster style, Diprotodon, or whatever they describe that as being, the one with the long neck and the small head and the big body and the fins, the classic Nessie. So this has been reported over the years as being seen in the Hawkesbury River, and you could probably go up that way and ask around, and you'd probably get some stories from people. So it's described as a dark shadow with that long neck, and it's sort of plesiosaurish from the Jurassic period. So basically a living dinosaur. And and you can speculate as to whether there's still little pockets of these creatures that are living around the world in places like Loch Ness, which is a completely different geographical environment to the Hawkesbury River and Australia. So the Hawkesbury River, obviously, like all rivers, flows to the ocean. So this thing's not trapped, perhaps in the way that a breeding Nessie population is seen to be. In that sense, the Hawkesbury River monster is not that. So it's and there's some pictures of it too out there, and they're all sort of like long-range photos. Very much like that sort of the Nessie pictures that you've seen famously over the years, as another thing. So it's just another creature that's out there that throws into this mix of crypto strangeness that's in the Australian landscape. So it's an interesting. It's interesting, and at the same time, where do you go with any of these things?
Yeah. Well, there you have it, folks. There's another episode from Strange Encounters Down Under and on Australasian Cryptids. We hope you enjoyed it. And just another reminder that if you did, please like it. And if you think other people might like to watch it, then please share it. And if you want to hear more from us, then please subscribe. And remember to tap the bell so that you get the notifications of when we upload these recordings. So until next time, we will see you later. Stay safe, everyone, and bye for now.
Cheers. Bye, everyone.